Welcome to the Futures Forum Live online, where we explore the landscape and byways of our shared futures. On this edition of the Futures Forum Live, we exchange ideas, information, education, and inspiration about the future of Black America. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get Futures Sense now. Share this story and share our future. Stay tuned for a journey to the future with host Dr. Claire Nelson.
Greetings and welcome to Futures Forum Live, the online e-magazine of the Futures Forum. February is Black History Month, and so we're having a conversation on the future history of Black America. Specifically, I'm interested in examining how Blacks in America might be faring in the year 2030, which is actually very near, and beyond, 2040, 2050, who knows. 2030 isn't considered a pull year for many people because that's the year the United Nations has set as a target year when countries around the world have agreed they will attempt to reach the Sustainable Development Goals, that is 17 global goals for achieving greater livability and thriving for more people in the world. Now, goal number 10 focuses on inequality, and I must say there's been very scant attention paid to that one. And because I also know that America is going to be a majority minority country in the year 2030, I'm really interested in finding out how exactly inequality might be playing out at that time. What might 2030 look like for Blacks in America, and how will the various economic, social, and technological shifts that are emerging right now impact on the well-being of the Black community? So in this episode, I have the distinct pleasure of speaking with SHARIFF ABDULLAH. Now, SHARIFF is the founder and director of something called Commonway Institute. It is dedicated to the creation of a society that is in line with the deeper spiritual values. I've been watching his work for some time and find it very interesting. He basically abandoned many years ago a potentially lucrative career in the law to take on what he thought was a deeper stab at changing and making society a better place. He recognizes that we cannot solve humanity's global problems with the same attitudes, philosophies, and consciousness that created the problem in the first place. And so Commonway Institute has been trying to teach people for several years how to shape a world that works for all. The core of his work then is inclusivity. And he has worked with thousands of individuals and facilitated scores of leadership sessions and workshops for public and private organizations, government, city, county, federal, around the world, many countries. And he has received many awards, including the Martin Luther King's Lifetime Achievement Award from the World Arts Foundation and the Champion of Peace, Reconciliation and Forgiveness Award from the New Thought Center for Spiritual Living. So without further ado, let's jump right in. I'm sure there's a lot that I can certainly learn from this conversation. Greetings, SHARIFF, how are you? I'm
doing really well. How are you doing?
Thank you so much. I am doing well. Thank you so much for taking time for joining me. One of the things that struck me is that your contention about the future is certainly not a 10-year future because you're trying to do a deep paradigm shift. But I wanted to start with 2030 because, interestingly enough, the UN tends to shy away from things that deal with, let's say, the spirituality of our work, even though the UN does have a major movement attached side by side around interfaith, etc. So tell me from your vantage point, beginning at 2030 and going out from there, where do you think we might be in America in 2030, which is only 10 years, it's not a long time. Yeah. What are you seeing as you look out into the horizon?
Well, unless we make some substantial changes right now, what I see happening in 2030 is more of what we've got, okay? So people who are rich are gonna get richer. People who are poor are either gonna stay the same or get poorer. Now, I know that the Millennium Goals have for every country benchmarks for being in poverty, benchmarks for development, etc. But all of these are still inside of a context, and that context that you said is exactly right. UN doesn't pay any attention to what they consider to be spiritual issues. I happen to not think that well, I do think that suicide is a spiritual issue, but it's not a religious issue. I think it's an issue of whether or not we as human beings actually fit on this planet. So the question, my 2030 question is, are there more of us working to fit ourselves into this planet, or are we still going to be trying to live on top of it? Okay. So the challenge is whether or not we develop a different consciousness, whether or not we develop a different way of looking at things. And when I say we, I mean all human beings. But in the context of your program, I'm thinking we, as Black people in the United States, where is our consciousness at this point, and where is it going to be 10 years from now?
Well, that's a good question, because one of the things you think about is like race is sort of a four-letter word. You know, it's something that nobody wants to talk about or think about. Certainly, I was very active in the UN World Conference on Racism process, and at that point, it is 2001, which is many years ago. There was this idea, certainly from the mainstream organizations, that we should no longer think in terms of race. And of course, most of us in the Black community and other minority groups from India, etc., were like horrified, like, okay, now that you have already divided the world, and we're now complaining you want to change it, how are we going to make sure policy works? It's not only about how we feel, it's about actual policy. So as we talk about, because you know your work is very different from the traditional development, let's say, spectrum I'm used to, I really want to see if I can dig deeper into this idea of the paradigm shift that has to begin at the level of consciousness. So there's a group of people thinking through now, if we want to live in the safe, just space for humanity, right, that development donut economics talks about. We can't go beyond certain physical boundaries. People don't seem to understand that. I know you do, right? But we also don't want to go below what we now agree, most of us, I mean, a certain type of dignity that humans should enjoy. What are 2 or 3 ways that you might advance this conversation for us in the Black community in particular? Because I do think the Black community in the West in particular, those of us whose ancestors were formerly enslaved, have a different, perhaps, construct from those in the African continent, and especially even those who were like never colonized, let's say Ethiopia versus the rest of the continent. So I want to kind of help me streamline my thoughts, if you will, around this concept.
I think that you touched on almost all of the threads that I'm dealing with when I start thinking about Black people in this country, that we carry a mark, what Wendell Berry calls the hidden wound. Now, Wendell Berry talks about this hidden wound being what slavery did to white people. He said that as wounded as Black people were, we are equally wounded. It's just that ours doesn't show. So white people have an amazing amount of work to do to dig out their own past, to separate out their own past and stop acting like, oh, this didn't happen. At the same time, we, African Americans, and other people who have been either enslaved or colonized, okay, we have to dig that wound out of ourselves. We can't walk around like a badge of honor and say, oh yeah, everything's okay. I can make you feel uncomfortable by just talking about slavery, or just talking about racism, just talking about the American apartheid system. What we have to do is say, no, that wound is not doing me any good. It's not doing my children any good. And so what we're going to have to do is remove that. Now, this is part of a process that I've been involved in for the past 30 years or so, of digging out that woundedness in myself so that I can be a fully participative human being on this planet, not just in this society, not just in my city, but on the entire planet. Similarly, I think that every person who has experienced that wound all down through their history needs to be digging that out also, okay? Now, once we do that, and then once whites dig out their own hidden wound, we will be doing development in a completely different way, okay? It won't be development that protects the interest of the super rich so that they can become super richer. It won't be development that's going to feed the greed and corruption around the world. I mean, if you take a globe and you spin it,
Yeah.
and you stick a pin anywhere, the
Yeah.
government, wherever you stuck that pin, is corrupt. I don't care. And so we've got a model that has to change. Now, who's going to make the change? I would say that Black people in this country will either be the leaders of that change, will be leading the change, or we will be nowhere near it. We will be completely inconsequential to history.
Yeah.
And I think that those, we can see the seeds of that right now. We can see America, Black America, going in 2 or 3 different directions. Part of Black America becomes invisible, just gets absorbed into white America. We're just doing the same thing that all the white folks are doing and having a ball, okay? Then there's another Black community. This is the Black underclass. And I should say, this is the class that I am from. I was raised in Camden, New Jersey, which is now the worst city in America. Was then too, by the way. And
I'm not laughing at you, but
yeah, no, it's you either have to laugh or cry, you know. There's no bragging rights from being from the second worst city in America, which I think is Gary or something like that. So I know from the inside what poverty looks like. I know from the inside what economic oppression feels like. And so I see Black people who are in what we would call the ghetto. And they're still there, despite the fact that they can walk out anytime they want to. Okay.
Because the idea that
it's here.
Like it's mental slavery. But there's so much you said I want to unpack.
Yeah.
First thing I want to unpack is this concept of the wound, right? I want to address it from a very probably controversial perspective, because I used to say to many of my friends that Barack Obama was really not a Black person in the traditional sense of the word, because he was raised in a white home, right? So that's one piece. The second thing of this woundedness is this idea of woundedness because of the white community, because they actually have a psychological system that they do believe, really, the myth that they're better than everybody else. So that's a huge scar, if you will. And then the third one I think that came up when you started talking is this concept of, okay, if we're to do something about it, how do we really, in this climate especially, or is this the right climate, given the climate of America right now, to really begin to have this honest conversation on this woundedness, not just in America, it's actually a global wound, right?
Yes, indeed.
And what I call evolutionary leaders have to do to help us evolve so that by the year 2100, we'll still have a human race, so to speak. So let's start with it. I'm sorry.
And you said we do have 2 or 3 hours to do this, right? Okay.
Well, we're starting more than half an hour.
Exactly.
We're going to do 2 parts. We're going to do the first part. So let's deal with this.
Okay.
This woundedness piece first.
I really agree with you, except you said in terms of the wound that there's this notion among whites that they have this myth that they are better.
Yes.
that they think that they're better than everyone else. I think the problem is exactly the opposite. I
Okay.
think what we see as racism
Mhm.
is this inner fear that they're inferior, and that they puff up
Ah,
by saying I'm better than this, I'm better than you, etc.
ah,
And I'm going to keep you out of my schools to make sure that you don't show that you are better than I am. I'm going to keep you off the track. I'm going to keep you away from this. The whole idea of apartheid, the whole idea of separation, is so that they
ah.
never have to show this. And so the thing that that Trump has done is it
Surface
makes,
the fear.
huh?
Yes, surface the
It's
fear.
he's surface, and because of that, he's doing us a favor. Okay, so we can see that the people who are showing up to his rallies, and he himself, he's if he didn't have 8 zeros in his bank account. Oh, wait, I think this is 10 zeros then. How many zeros is a billion? If he
We don't
didn't
know
have,
for a fact. We don't know for a fact. So let's just get.
right, and also we right, there's these theoretical zeros in his bank account, that would you see that this person is someone who is exemplifying the values of America? Do you see this person as being someone who is astute, who is knowledgeable, who is uh, who actually is representing someone other than the small group of people who go to his rallies? And probably all the same people go to all the same rallies. And so, but the reason he's president is that the entire system is empty. The reason that he's there is that the entire system has to be overhauled. And as long as we're saying our most important thing is defeating Trump, we are falling right back into the same issue. To me, the most important thing is, how do we change our consciousness so that this situation will never, ever happen again? Okay? How do we change our consciousness so that no one is left behind, that the world actually can work for all human beings, and the world also works for all living beings? That means that the beings that are not living beings, it may not work for them, like corporations. Like, okay, a corporation's a piece of paper, and we can take the piece of paper and throw it away. But a living being should not be thrown away. A living being, you, me, all the people who are listening to this, these are the building blocks of a society, not money. Okay,
Yeah.
and so when I become a fully conscious human being,
Mhm.
when I encourage everyone else, and I spend a lot of time encouraging white people to become fully conscious human beings, then all of us together will be able to resolve every problem that we've got on our planet.
Yeah.
And until that time, we'll never resolve a single one.
Well, I do think you are onto something there. This idea of fear. I do think that what we're seeing now is fear manifesting very visibly. And I hadn't thought about that as actually not the fear. I was thinking fear on of okay, that really they are going to be overcome by this populace that is not looking like them, quote unquote. And once we had a black president, it kind of made the whole reality shift totally. Like the whole mythology just basically stopped. Bruh. So what you're seeing is the eruption of the opposite, because that's how life is. Energy goes this way, it goes the other way. And I also think that I wanted to comment on this is that the reason why I thought Barack Obama could have been president, because he doesn't have the energetic, let's say, wounding of a traditional African American who grew up in a black home. He grew up with a white person basically wiping his nose and wiping his bottom. So, I mean, he doesn't have the same sense of like, well, maybe something is off here. Am I making sense? What do you feel about that as to just kind of say, well, how did America go through this moment and then drop back down to this moment? What
Right.
happened spiritually?
Okay, so let's start with the Trump consciousness and then go to the Obama consciousness.
Yes.
The Trump consciousness is the last gasp of a consciousness, a society that's going out of style.
Mhm.
It would have been out of style a long time ago if it weren't for the media constantly cranking up the drum whenever some instance happens. Okay. So what we need to be doing is asking, are these folks really the people who are leading our society? Our society has changed so much in the last 30, 40, 50 years. I can remember my relatives, my uncles having to toe the line, smile, act a certain way down in Virginia, because if you offended a white person, you could get beat up. Well, you get first fired, beat up, you could get killed, and nothing would happen. Now, something would happen. We know that something would happen. We can see those things happening all the time. So I think that as opposed to saying that the Trump consciousness is on the rise, I think it's on the decline. I think the only thing that keeps it going is that there's nothing on the other side. Okay. Okay. So now let's talk about Obama. I am not going to judge or disparage him for his upbringing. I'm not going to say whether, well, actually, I don't say whether anybody is Black or is not. That's a question that you have to answer for yourself. And I think that he has answered that question for himself. I think that it's clear that his life and lifestyle is very different from mine. Okay. I think that I was probably 12 or something like that before I really even saw a white person that wasn't ministering to me in some way. The head of the welfare department was white. All the police were white. You know, the folks in the stores were white. But just in terms of encountering a white person, that's probably 10, 11 or so before that even happened. And so I have a very different perspective on the world. We have to remember, though, that that Obama is the creature of his class. Okay, is a creature of his, and this is true for all of our elected leaders. We need to start asking people, what's your background? You know, you can talk a given way, you can say certain things, but have you actually had the experience of, like I said, when I would watch my mother trying to figure out how she's going to feed 3 kids and keep a roof over their head with a welfare check that was inadequate to do anything. Okay. Now, so when I talk about things like welfare or talk about poverty or whatever, I'm not talking about something that's theoretical that I read in a book somewhere, or I'm not talking about these percentage goals and things are so much better because the percentage goals have changed, or we have 2,000 more jobs in America because from yesterday, etc. That doesn't mean anything. That's meaningless to a person who has the pain of inferiority in themselves.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean anything for that person who isn't uplifted by their circumstances, by their lives, etc. I happen to be really fortunate growing up in the time of the Black Power movement.
Mm-hmm.
I was really fortunate, and this is literally the grace of God. I do really, really well on standardized tests. So I got a free ride to college. I got a free ride through law school. I know, and even while I'm there, I know that this is not something that the average Black person in America is experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we need to be focused on the good of all, and not just say, well, we've decreased poverty from 32% to 28%, so we're doing good. It's like, no, that is and this gets back to the spiritual side of things, that to me is immoral. I'm never going to say it's okay for this group to be impoverished. It's okay. We've managed poverty. I don't want to manage it. I want to eliminate it completely. If we approached poverty the way that we approach building a military, there would be no poor people in America, and probably not even on the planet.
So let me ask you a question, because this is very critical. So given this idea of eliminating poverty, but going back also to your idea about living beings, right? Mm-hmm. What metrics or what measures? So think about this future now. Let's take it to 2040. That can give us more time.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
What measure? Because I agree that telling someone that 10% means nothing. What does a future with less poverty look like in a technologically automated artificial intelligence, Internet of Things world, right? Mm-hmm. Especially if we're talking about a world where the benchmarks of non-poverty, I'm going to call it that, is a consumption economy. I mean, what are we really then out picturing as a more just society for all living beings?
If I could do one thing, what I would do is establish a gross happiness index, like the country of,
okay.
Yeah, like the country of Bhutan, where they measure how good their country is by how happy the people are. Okay. Now, I think that we can, and I think that we should create a gross happiness misery index. How many people are happy? How many people are in misery? And these numbers should go up and these should go down. Okay. And at that point, you can start asking the question, not just, did we eliminate poverty? Do we eliminate poverty and this person is still suicidal, okay? Because we haven't addressed the things that are driving their despair, okay? So can we create a happiness index and say, even though that person has a job, even though their income went up, their happiness didn't go up. Their fulfillment in life. By happiness, I don't mean how entertained we are.
Exactly.
This is what Thomas Jefferson was talking about in terms of happiness.
The pursuit of happiness.
Yes, and how fulfilled are we? Okay, and I think that we can be fulfilled by having meaning and purpose in our life. And we've got so many tools. We've got so much automated stuff. We lack that feeling that I'm needed in this society. And that's the thing that we need to get back to, I think.
But there's two questions. I want to leave let's leave the gross happiness index into the last section, because I want to come back to that, because I want to actually, we can get some action items certainly for me out of this. Okay. This idea then of this automation, how are you then seeing us educating leaders then around the choices, the policy choices we have to make, right? Because in fact, the automation is going to, as you said earlier, if we continue as we have been doing, do away with more of the people who are in the working class that don't have the skill sets to do these jobs. Because every time I go to the supermarket, I try to go to the one with the cashier or the drugstore. And if there's no person at all, I stand up and I fumble until somebody comes and helps me. And on one occasion, actually, somebody had an attitude. I'm like, you better be glad I fumbled, because I'm going to do it to save your job, because soon you won't have a job. So how do we begin to have a conversation in this really crucial time? If Elon Musk himself is saying, hey, maybe this AI thing is not such a smart thing after all, how do we amplify that in this very media that's very focused on other, what I call trivial things? How do we begin to amplify this conversation? Yeah.
So I'm in Portland, Oregon, and in the state of Oregon, you cannot pump your own gas. Somebody has to pump it for you. Okay. And that creates thousands of jobs for people who don't have, you don't have to go to college, you don't have to have work skill. You just have to know where the nozzle fits in and how to push the button on the gas pump. We can mandate work that is meaningful, that's connected, etc. What we're doing is we're doing less and less of that, and I think it will take political and economic will to change that picture. Right now, on my apartment, they're switching out the regular electric meters for smart meters. They will not have a meter person walking around taking numbers anymore. They'll push a button downtown and boom, all the numbers are there. Okay.
But suppose it's incorrect.
Well, there's no way of knowing that, is it?
That's what I'm concerned about. I swear that my light bill and my water bill is not the correct bill.
Right. Yeah. So there's going to be no human being in the loop for you to talk to. So just kind of give that up. And at some point in time, we have to realize what all that is doing is creating an inhumane society, a society of non-humans. And what are all the human beings supposed to do? Watch TV, and consume. And if you don't have the money to consume, then we throw you to the side. And so the bottom line is we have to have the political will, the economic will, and that will has to be aligned with our consciousness. And right now, I'm not seeing that on the left. I'm not seeing that on the right. I'm not even seeing it in the middle. We've got to elevate the entire conversation, and we've got to know how to do that. We've got to become serious about doing that, not getting caught up in hype and things like that. The hype machine's going to go into overdrive in 2020. Will Trump get reelected? Oh, we have to stop Trump, etc. There's going to be hundreds of millions of dollars spent on that, and none of that is going to address the despair of a young person who is suicidal or on drugs. That none of that is going to address the emptiness that's in someone's heart because they can't support their family because we've created this inhumane society.
So with that, I'm going to just take a short break because this conversation will not be done in half an hour. So
you have been listening to the Futures Forum Live online. This podcast aims to tell and share stories about the emerging future and help us better shape the future we want. The Futures Forum Live online is a production of the Futures Forum in Washington, D.C. For more information, visit www.thefuturesforum.org. Get future sense now. Remember, our future is embedded in the landscape of the present. Share this story and share the future.